The land of the Yangtze, where it all began, was not kind. It was demanding. Not just any plant could survive there, in the flooded fields, between the seasons of torrential rains and oppressive heat. Rice was one of those rare gifts that not only survived but thrived. It grew, silently, with a tenacity that cannot be taught. It simply is. No one pretended to understand the depth of that simple act of sowing. It was much more than planting to harvest. It was a pact with the future. Imagine, at that time, the villages surrounding the river, with their modest houses of wood and straw, and the lives that were built around the cycle of rice. The harvest was not just a moment of abundance. It was a ritual of survival. The hands, those same hands that had prepared the soil and planted the seedlings, returned months later to harvest each grain with the care of someone handling a jewel. There was reverence there, an almost spiritual respect. It's no wonder that, in Asian cultures, rice took on a sacred role. Not a single grain is wasted. Can you see the celebrations? The end of the harvest was marked by festivals, drums echoing as night fell, the fields now empty, but the barns full. The sweet smell of cooked rice mixed with the aroma of wood burning in the bonfires. And there, around the fire, people gathered. It was more than physical sustenance. It was the bond that kept them connected to what was essential, to the cycle of life, of planting and harvesting, of beginning and end. Rice was not just food. It was history, tradition, security. It was life itself in the form of a grain. Over time, rice was no longer exclusive to China. India embraced it with the fervor of those who recognized the value of something sacred. On the banks of the Ganges, rice found a new stage, where rituals and meals blended into a spiritual dance. Here it acquired new symbolism. It was offered to the gods, as an offering in temples, and shared among mortals, as part of religious and family celebrations. Rice became a link between the human and the divine, something that crosses dimensions, that connects the physical world to the spiritual. And it was in this same rhythm of quiet expansion that rice found its way beyond Asia. In Southeast Asia, it became essential, with flooded lands that began to be shaped into steps, carved into the mountainsides. The rice terraces, so iconic today, emerged as an ingenious response to the needs of cultivation. If the land didn't allow for planting, man transformed it, creating fields that seemed to touch the sky. Imagine climbing these hills, seeing the world reflected in the still water of the terraces, as if the horizon was no longer just a meeting between earth and sky, but also between land and water. A perfect balance. A reflection of life itself. And yet, rice didn't stop. Somehow, it always found its way. When it arrived in Africa, it was received with a kind of intimacy that cannot be explained. The people of West Africa were already familiar with a native variety of rice, but this new species, brought by Arab traders, brought new life to the riverbanks and African swamps. Africans didn't need to learn to love rice. It was already part of their lives. But this new version brought new opportunities, new ways of thinking about cultivation. And so, rice adapted again, an untiring chameleon, changing according to circumstances, but without losing its essence. When, centuries later, rice crossed the Atlantic with the dark currents of the slave trade, it carried more than seeds. It carried knowledge, the ancestral wisdom of those who planted it, harvested it, and prepared it. The enslaved Africans who arrived in the Americas brought in their memories the expertise of cultivating rice in difficult lands, a knowledge passed down from generation to generation, silently, like a well-kept secret. And so, even amidst suffering, rice thrived. It found new grounds in the swamps of South Carolina and Georgia, where rice plantations soon became one of the region's main economic activities. The painful irony of this story is that while the slave owners benefited economically from rice, the true wisdom behind its production came from the enslaved hands that knew every detail of the grain cycle. They planted, harvested, and at the end of the day, it was they themselves who fed their families with what they had cultivated. There was a certain silent resistance there, an invisible strength passed down from generation to generation, of how rice, even in such adverse conditions, continued to be a symbol of resilience. With each grain that sprouted, it was as if the story of resistance and suffering was renewed, transformed, somehow, into hope. Over time, the Americas became a new home for rice. Louisiana, Texas, California, places where the soil and climate allowed rice to continue its journey. And so, it entered the kitchens of the humblest homes to the wealthiest ones. In Latin America, rice found unforgettable partnerships. With beans, it created a marriage that lasts to this day, in dishes that sustain generations. In Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Brazil, rice is the foundation of family meals. It is the comfort that warms both stomach and heart. And in the United States, especially in the South, rice became a fundamental part of Creole cuisine, of rich and spicy jambalayas, carrying with it all the echoes of its past journeys. It might be easy to look at rice today and not perceive the weight of its history. After all, it's everywhere, on supermarket shelves, in plastic bags or in bulk, mixed with other foods. It's one of those grains that have become so commonplace that it seems to have lost its mystery. But that's just an illusion. Every grain of rice you see is a piece of an ancient story, a story that involves conquests, sacrifices, discoveries, and traditions that cross continents and eras. It carries on its back the burden of centuries of civilizations, of cultures that rose and fell, of empires that came and went. And what is fascinating, what continues to impress me, is how rice never lost its essence. Even as it traveled the world, as it mixed with new cultures, new flavors, it always remained true to itself. No matter where it grows, whether on the sculpted mountains of Vietnam, on the banks of India's rivers, in the swamps of West Africa, or the flooded plains of South Carolina, rice has always found a way to thrive. It is, ultimately, the symbol of human persistence. It withstands time, geography, the most adverse conditions. So, when you look at your next plate of rice, remember this. It's not just there to feed you. It's a silent witness to all the struggles, all the celebrations, all the moments of life that came before you. It is the invisible link that connects the past to the present, a bridge between cultures, between times and places. Eating rice is, in a way, participating in that long journey, in that story that never stops, that continues growing, grain by grain, plate by plate, generation by generation. Rice, like life itself, never stops reinventing itself. And that's how it will continue, as long as there are hands willing to plant it, hearts willing to share it, and mouths that, in chewing it unknowingly, are tasting a piece of the past, the present, and the future. If you enjoyed this incredible journey through the history of rice, don't forget to leave your like. It really helps the channel. Subscribe for more fascinating stories and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any content. Share this video with your friends and comment below on what impressed you the most about the rice journey. Let's continue this conversation in the comments.